Okay, so so we had been discussing about Indo-US relations in the last class. We're discussing about the various disputes that are there between India and US. We spoke about trade, right? We spoke about divergent policies that both the countries have followed. America believes in the policy of strategic alliances, while India believes in strategic autonomy. We had seen that. And we also had seen about the differences both these countries have with respect to, the policies that the countries have adopted. For example, America had adopted a different policy in Middle East, which India does not approve. Okay, and Donald Trump speaks about peace board and all that, which India does not accept. A lot of things have been changing in recent times. Okay, and the the combinations and the way the states are viewing the present international system shows that there is a fundamental realignment that is happening. Okay, now what's happening? Have you seen that Canadian Prime Minister's speech recently, which was given at Davos? Have you seen that speech? ఇట్లాంటివి చూడాలండి. చాలామంది ఆయన ఇచ్చిన స్పీచ్ని ఇట్స్ ఎ గేమ్ చేంజర్ అని చెప్పి అంటున్నారు అనమాట. ఓకే, ఇట్స్ హెరాల్డెడ్ as one of the well prepared speeches కదా. He spoke about a lot of statesmen. He spoke about Thucydides, a very famous Greek philosopher, and his ideas about how states should conduct themselves. A lot of things he spoke about. It was in this speech that he introduced something new. Okay, something very new, which even involves India also to some extent. Now you know that in recent times, Canada, which was a very faithful follower of US for more than a century now, with very strong trade relations, with strong strategic relations, is being bullied by Donald Trump, isn't it? Canada exists because of US. That's a statement given by Donald Trump. Canada exists because of US. మరి టూ మచ్ కదా. వాళ్ళు మా దయ మీద మీరు బతుకుతున్నారని చెప్పి ఒక దేశంతో ఎట్లా అంటారు చెప్పండి. యువర్ సర్వైవింగ్ ఆన్ అవర్ మర్సీ అన్నట్టు చెప్తే కార్నే సెడ్ కెనడా ఎగ్జిస్ట్స్, కెనడా థ్రైవ్స్ బికాస్ వీఆర్ కెనేడియన్, నాట్ బై వర్చ్యూ ఆఫ్ the mercy of US. We are thriving because we are Canadian. And he set out to show that it is not Canada which is dependent on America. It is America which is dependent on Canada. We discussed that yesterday. We discussed about the oil that Canada supplies to America, which is the fodder for the huge petroleum refineries that USA has. 95% of US power is through uranium, which Canada is supplying. 40% of which is being supplied by Canada. Okay, and several critical minerals also are being supplied by Canada. Okay, now US is threatening Canada that it is going to impose tariffs and sanctions on Canada and all that stuff. Now, this person took exceptional objection to statements given by Donald Trump, and he set out to change the world order. Okay, now what we are seeing today is rivalry between great powers. China has emerged as a big power today. We are seeing what's called as the great power rivalry. Across the whole world, there is a great power rivalry. There is a competition between big powers. And this competition is actually affecting what are called as middle powers. Okay. Now this person Carney, in his speech, he mentions about the need to build middle power alliances to counter the coercion imposed by great powers. Great powers are imposing coercion. Great powers are using force. Great powers are using sanctions, trade wars, tariffs, and threats against the middle powers. If you don't listen to what I say, I'm going to impose 100% tariff on you, 500% tariffs on you. You know, these are threats which are being imposed by big powers, great powers. What is it that the middle powers have to do? The middle powers should form alliances, And one stark example of such middle power alliance is the Indo-EU trade deal. Okay, this is an example of how the other powers are aligning themselves to create alternate supply routes. The world is changing very, very quickly, very, very fast. Okay, and the pace at which the world is changing is mind-boggling sometimes. Okay, you got to keep up with this because you're all going to be bureaucrats, isn't it? It's up to you how you keep up with this pace. Daily newspapers లో ఏదో ఒకటి కనిపిస్తుంది కదా, అన్ని నోట్ చేసుకోవాల్సి వస్తుంది కదా, అన్ని రాసుకోవాల్సి వస్తుంది, అన్ని ఫాలో అవ్వాల్సి వస్తుంది, isn't it? Something new is being seen every day in the newspapers. The way India had conducted its Republic Day celebrations also is something which requires to be studied properly. This is a new form of diplomacy that which India has employed in the recent Republic Day. Things are changing very quickly. You keep yourself very abreast. There was a question that was asked to me by a student today morning in a class. He asked me, is it possible for everybody or for anybody to clear the civil services exam, or does it require some special qualities? And what do you think? Do you think for clearing the civil service examination, candidate requires to have some special qualities? Photographic memory kavala? Emana kavala special qualities? Don't require. Anybody is capable of clearing the civil services exam provided you don't make mistakes. You don't make wrong choices. Adokkate criteria. Don't make mistakes. Don't make wrong choices. Plan your preparation with common sense and practicality. Worldly wise అంటారు చూసారా, కొంతమందికి బుకిష్ నాలెడ్జ్ ఉండదు, కానీ ప్రపంచంతో ఎట్లా నడుచుకోవాలి ఆ తీరుతెందులు బాగా తెలుసు. వరల్డ్లీ వైజ్ కామన్ సెన్స్ బాగుంటుంది చూసారా. That is what you require to apply for this preparation. Don't make mistakes. Don't make wrong choices. Use practicality and common sense approach. You can clear the exam. Anybody can clear the exam. దానికి ఏమి exceptional intelligence, photographic memories ఏం అక్కర్లా. Average students also can clear the exam. I have seen a lot of average students clear the exam in fact. They are organized, systematic, and they are practical in their approach. Okay? So, this is what's required. Examinationకి ఏం కావాలి, అదొక్కటి చేసుకుంటూ వెళ్ళిపోతే చాలు. One thing that is required for this examination is being interdisciplinary and being update. Got to read every day, okay, till you clear this examination. Now, this fellow Carney, he said, to hell with US, we are going to create a middle power alliance. He reached out to Australia. He's going to Australia in March. He's also reached out to India. He's coming to India in March. Canada is going to cut a $25 billion 10-year period uranium deal with India, which is supposed to be a game changer as far as India is concerned, because India wants to expand its nuclear power program, and for that India is looking for a reliable uranium supplier or supply chain for uranium which is reliable and stable. A 10-year $25 billion uranium deal is going to be signed very soon between India and Canada. This is going to be a game changer. This is what's called as middle power alliances. He's also going to enter into an agreement for trade and for investments with India, it seems. So this is what's called as middle power alliance. So tomorrow, the international landscape is going to be characterized by the big power rivalry and the middle power alliances. This is what we are going to see. India, EU, India, Canada, trade deal. India had reached out to Oman for a free trade agreement. Australia is reaching out to its allies for creation of a middle power alliance. Slowly, the international landscape is continuously undergoing a change. Okay, this is what we are seeing today. Kabatti, things are going to change very quickly, right? So, all this is primarily because China is aggressive and America has gone crazy, isn't it? That's the reason why these new possibilities are taking their birth now. America has actually gone crazy. You know that, right? They don't know what they are doing, right? They are breaking alliances, they are imposing sanctions, tariffs, and all that stuff. Okay. Anyway, just remember this phrase, middle power alliance. This is going to become a very important watchword in the coming years also. Okay. What does it mean? It means an alliance of all the middle powers which are going to combine and enter into alliances so that they will not be coerced or threatened by the big powers. Okay, this is the meaning of middle power alliance, and that's proposed by Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, recently we had a problem with Canada also, isn't it? Justin Trudeau was the former Prime Minister of Canada, and he accused India of engaging in extraterritorial killings. Have you heard about that? He gave a statement in the Parliament saying that India and Indian government had sent some mercenaries to our country to kill our citizens. There was this person called Niger, who is a separate Khalistani activist who was murdered in Canada. Durandar type la evaro vellar Canada ki velli vannu champesaranta. Okay, and he accused India. The investigation is now going on in Canada. Itlanti konni problems unnai, but still the Canadian Prime Minister had reached out to India. Okay, and he called for a middle power alliance for which India is considered to be a very key player. Okay, so this is how India is going to play an important role. Okay, so uranium and all that is what we are looking at. Next, speaking about Indo-US relations yesterday, we spoke about yet another difference in approach that India and US have, and that is related to what's called as environmental negotiations. Isn't it? Both India and US are having a difference of opinion as far as environmental negotiations are concerned. There is a problem with environment and environmental negotiations. The problem is that environment, it's a part of what's very famously called as the global common, isn't it? It is the common property of the entire mankind. They are called as global commons. Antarctica, ఏ ఒక్క కంట్రీ సోవరిటీ లేదు కదా అంటార్కిటికా మీద. హై సీస్, రైట్, outer space, environment, they are all called as global commons, and we have this dilemma or problem of global commons, of which environment is an important part. Okay, now if you know, environment became a very important issue in international relations starting from 1970s onwards, when it was realized that environmental degradation is affecting nations and somebody requires to take up the responsibility. Okay, so who will take up the responsibility? It's a common property. It's a common property. Who will take up the responsibility? Who will bear the costs? Now that is the reason why protection of environment also became an international issue. Okay, because countries which are polluting the environment are not ready to share the burden of costs for environmental cleanup. Environmental clean చేసుకోవాలి కదా మనమే, isn't it? Almost all the global commons have this problem. The pollution of high seas, the pollution of Antarctica, the accumulation of satellite debris in outer space surrounding Earth, pollution of environment. Nobody wants to assume responsibilities. Everybody becomes a polluter, but nobody wants to assume the responsibilities of cleaning this pollution. It is here that India and America have crossed horns with each other. There is a problem between India and US about environmental management or environmental protection. Now please remember that in 1972, for the first time, a United Nations sponsored conference took place on environment, which was called as the Stockholm Conference, from which environment emerged as an important issue in international politics. Okay, please take down. The differences in India, the differences between India and US, with respect to climate change and environmental protection. Environment became an issue in international relations. Environment became an issue in international relations starting from the 1970s. Environment is considered a part of global commons. Environment is considered to be a part of global commons. అంటే వాట్ డస్ ఇట్ మీన్? కామన్ ప్రాపర్టీ ఆఫ్ హ్యూమన్ కైండ్ అండి. గ్లోబల్ కామన్స్ అంటే బ్రాకెట్లో రాసుకోండి, కామన్ ప్రాపర్టీ ఆఫ్ హ్యూమన్ కైండ్. Okay, and today almost everybody of us realize the present strategy of economic development has adverse impact on environment. The present strategy of economic development has an adverse impact on environment. Can you tell me which is the country which is polluting the environment most today? US, China. Second? India. Okay, so India is the second most polluting country in the whole world, you know, and that's the reason why Donald Trump had said India is producing too much of population and this big population is polluting the world. You know, he himself had said that. So India is one of the largest polluters of the world today, along with China. China is the biggest polluter. Agreed. Now, do you think that India, being the largest polluter, one of the largest polluters, should assume greater responsibility for protection of environment compared to the Western countries or not? No. Why not? Yeah, because we want a principle called the historical principle for sharing the responsibility for protection of environment. మేము ఇవాళ పొల్యూట్ చేస్తున్నాం, మీరు గత సంచరి నుంచి పొల్యూట్ చేస్తున్నారు కదా. ఇట్ ఈస్ యువర్ పొల్యూటెంట్స్ విచ్ హ్యావ్ అక్యుములేటెడ్ ఇన్ ద అట్మాస్ఫియర్, నాట్ అవర్స్, అండ్ యూ హ్యావ్ టు టేక్ అప్ ద రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ ఫర్ క్లీనింగ్ దీస్ పొల్యూటెంట్స్ ఫ్రమ్ ద అట్మాస్ఫియర్. Environmental pollution doesn't happen in one day, it happens over centuries. Over centuries the West had been polluting the atmosphere through its industrial revolution and all that. Okay, so West requires to assume a greater amount of responsibility. Now problem is that the countries are all agreed that they require to share the responsibility, but they differ in costs. Countries are giving primacy to national interests. Raskondi, environmental negotiations have become complex and have emerged as an issue with potential for conflict. In recent times, because of the following factors. One, national actors are guided by their national interests. National actors guided by their national interests. Two. Now please remember that environmental pollution today is being done by private organizations, particularly multinational corporations, which are increasingly outside the scope of responsibility. ఓకే, ఏదో ఒక మల్టీనేషనల్ కార్పొరేషన్ ఉంది, అది తీసుకెళ్ళి ఎక్కడో ఒక హజారస్ వేస్ట్ తీసుకెళ్ళి ఒక కాంటినెంట్లో డంప్ చేస్తుంది. ఇట్ ఈస్ నాట్ అకౌంటబుల్ ఆర్ రెస్పాన్సిబుల్, ఇజంట్ ఇట్? దీస్ ఆర్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ విచ్ ఆపరేట్ అవుట్సైడ్ ద స్కోప్ ఆఫ్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ. నేషనల్ గవర్నమెంట్స్ చేశారనుకోండి, దే కెన్ బి హెల్డ్ రెస్పాన్సిబుల్. మల్టీనేషనల్ కార్పొరేషన్స్ చేసినప్పుడు ఇట్ బికమ్స్ వెరీ డిఫికల్ట్ టు ఎస్టాబ్లిష్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ. గాట్ ఇట్? ప్లీజ్ టేక్ డౌన్. environmental pollution is done by multinational corporations to a great extent which act independently and are unaccountable for their actions. 3. Now please remember that, a country's actions impacting environment might not have immediate impact. The impact can be over a period of time, isn't it? The impact is long run. And if a country it pollutes the environment also, the effect is not singularly going to be on that country which pollutes the environment. It is going to be affecting other countries also, isn't it? ఎన్విరాన్మెంటల్ పొల్యూషన్ వల్ల నష్టం నాకుడికే కాదు కదా, అందరికీ ఉంటుంది కదా. కాబట్టి ఐ డోంట్ కేర్. ఓకే. అండ్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంటల్ పొల్యూషన్కి సంబంధించిన ఎఫెక్ట్ ఇవాళ రేపు ఎల్లుండి కాదు కదా, ఆఫ్టర్ 10 years అవుతుంది కదా. కాబట్టి ఐ డోంట్ కేర్. ద లాంగ్ టర్మ్ risk involved, as well as the large number of countries and communities which are going to be impacted by environmental pollution, makes the individual countries more irresponsible. That is another reason as to why environmental negotiations have become very complicated. Raskondi, the long term risks comma, and the tendency of effect of environmental degradation spreading to other nations or regions make the countries irresponsible. Okay, next, last, you know that any efforts to protect environment involves countries to make compromises on their developmental priorities. అంతే కదండి. ఎకనామిక్ డెవలప్మెంట్కి సంబంధించిన ప్రయారిటీస్ మనం కొంచెం పక్కన పెట్టవలసి ఉంటుంది. ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్, అమెరికా ఈజ్ సేయింగ్ దట్ ఇండియా షుడ్ స్విచ్ అవే ఫ్రమ్ కోల్ బేస్డ్ టెక్నాలజీస్. ఇండియా సెడ్ నో, వీఆర్ స్టిల్ ఎ పూర్ కంట్రీ. ఓకే, మాకు ఇప్పటికి కూడా ఊళ్ళల్లో కోల్తోటే నీళ్లు వేడి చేసుకుంటాం, ఇదన్నట్టు. కాబట్టి వీ కాంట్ డూ అవే విత్ కోల్ అండ్ కోల్ బేస్డ్ ఎనర్జీ ప్రొడక్షన్ యాజ్ ఆఫ్ నౌ ఇమీడియట్లీ. అమెరికా పుషెస్ ఇండియా టు రీప్లేస్ కోల్ బేస్డ్ ఎనర్జీ ప్రొడక్షన్. దిస్ ఈజ్ ఎ ప్రాబ్లమ్. దెర్ ఈజ్ ఎ కాస్ట్ ఇన్వాల్వ్డ్ ఇన్ స్విచ్చింగ్ ఓవర్ టు క్లీనర్ టెక్నాలజీస్ ఒకటి. అండ్ క్లీనర్ టెక్నాలజీస్ టు ఎ వెరీ గ్రేట్ ఎక్స్టెంట్ ఆర్ నాట్ ఎకనామికల్లీ వయబుల్ స్టిల్. ఓకే, క్లీనర్ టెక్నాలజీస్ ఇంకా వైబుల్ కాలేదండి. ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ చెప్పడం చాలా ఈజీ కదా. వాటర్ ఉంది, హైడ్రోజన్ బర్న్స్, ఆక్సిజన్ హెల్ప్స్ ఇన్ బర్నింగ్. ఈ రెండు వాటర్లో ఉన్నాయి కదా, దిస్ ఈజ్ యువర్ ఫ్యూయల్ అంటే సరిపోతుందా? సరిపోదు కదా. ద టెక్నాలజీ ఈజ్ స్టిల్ నాట్ వయబుల్. ఇట్స్ స్టిల్ నాట్ వయబుల్ కదా. దెర్ఫోర్ స్విచ్చింగ్ ఓవర్ టు క్లీనర్ టెక్నాలజీస్ రిక్వైర్స్ కాస్ట్. అడాప్టింగ్ క్లీనర్ టెక్నాలజీ ఇన్వాల్వ్స్ compromises on economic developmental priorities, and that's the reason why countries are reluctant. Okay, please take down. Unviable nature of cleaner technologies. And the need to make compromises on developmental priorities makes environmental management makes environmental management unattractive. Okay, as I told you, environment became a part of the mainstream agenda in international politics starting from 1972 with the Stockholm Convention, okay, or with what was called as Stockholm Conference, in which a declaration was adopted which made it obligatory for every country to take steps to protect environment. This is the beginning. 1972 నుంచే the, అంటే 50 years, 50 years have passed, more than 50 years have passed since environment began to be a part and parcel of consciousness of our policy makers, right? Please take down. The United Nations Conference on Human Environment of 1972. Please remember that these can be asked as bits in the preliminary also, okay, as a part of environment or as a part of IR, okay. UN Conference on Human Environment of 1972, popularly called as the Stockholm Convention, Stockholm Conference. Stockholm Conference was the first world conference that brought environment into the mainstream of global discourse. It resulted in global discourse అంటే discussions. This conference led to Stockholm Declaration, అంటే 26 ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ అడాప్ట్ చేసుకున్నారండి ఈ స్టాక్హోమ్ డిక్లరేషన్లో, which are considered to be the foundations of environmental law today. Also, it was this declaration that led to establishment of this body called United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. Have you heard about that? UNEP. That was an outcome of the Stockholm Conference of 1972. Raskondi. This conference led to a declaration which contained 26 principles. Which laid foundations for environmental law, as well as it established United Nations Environment Program, as well as it established United Nations Environment Program. Okay, and then of course you know that there was a very important summit that took place in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro called as the Earth Summit. Can you tell me the outcomes of Earth Summit? Excuse me? Agenda 21. What is that actually? Agenda 21. Agenda ante enti? Plan of action to adopt technologies which can aid in sustainable developmental projects, Agenda 21. But this is just a plan of action which was proposed. It is not binding. Any other important outcomes of 1992 Earth Summit? important outcomes of the Earth Summit 1992. It adopted some binding agreements. And can you give an example? Binding agreements. UNFCCC, United Nations Framework on Climate Change. Class lo unnam. United Nations Conference, UNFC, Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, UNFCCC, right? Inka emana chesara? There was also CBD, very good. Convention on Biodiversity. It was also a binding convention which made it compulsory for every country to prepare inventory of, its plant and animal species, as well as identify endangered species and take steps for their protection. This was Convention on Biodiversity, CBD. Important outcomes of the Earth Summit of 1992. Examination point of view chala important. Okay, please take down. The Earth Summit of 1992. The Earth Summit of 1992 created a more definitive framework for environmental protection. It adopted Agenda 21, which is in the form of a non-binding program calling for adoption of sustainable developmental strategies. Okay, so 21st century lo development should be sustainable development. Sustainable development, meeting the needs of the present without compromising on the needs of the future. That is the definition, right? That is sustainable development. Okay, so దానికి సంబంధించిన ఒక యాక్షన్ ప్లాన్ వీళ్ళు ఫస్ట్ టైం ప్రపోజ్ చేశారు. ఓకే, ఎజెండా 21. నెక్స్ట్ వన్ ఈస్ CBD, Convention on Biodiversity. Convention on Biodiversity is a binding treaty which requires all the countries and members to this convention anamata. Okay, which requires all the countries to prepare biodiversity అంటే ఏంటి? What do you mean by that? How do you define? What do you mean by environment? Environmental. నేను కూడా మీలాగే ఎగ్జామ్ ప్రిపేర్ అయ్యాను కదండి. కాబట్టి ఎన్విరాన్మెంట్, ద సమ్ టోటల్ ఆఫ్ ఇన్ఫ్లుయెన్సెస్ దట్ సరౌండ్ హ్యూమన్ బీయింగ్ ఈజ్ కాల్డ్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంట్. డెఫినేషన్స్ ఆర్ ఇంపార్టెంట్. మీరు వినే ఉంటారు కదా ఇవి. ఓకే, వీటిని రిజిస్టర్ చేసుకోండి, దే ఆర్ ఇంపార్టెంట్. ఇట్ విల్ హెల్ప్ యూ స్టార్ట్ రైటింగ్ యువర్ ఆన్సర్స్ ఈజీలీ. బయోడైవర్సిటీ, the variety of species, their gene pools, ఏదో ఉంది కదా దానికి some definition, the definition of biodiversity. Okay, so convention, it is a binding, రాసుకోండి, Convention on Biodiversity is a binding treaty requiring all nations to prepare inventories అంటే list. Okay, prepare list of the plant and animal species, comma, identify endangered species, and to reduce and to take steps for their protection. Next, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, is also a binding treaty that requires all the nations to reduce greenhouse gases. Okay, and it provided for a mechanism whereby countries could sit and consult among themselves and come out with certain targets. అయితే ఈ UNFCCC ఏదైతే ఉందో it did not fix up any specific deadlines or targets for GHG emissions. Can you tell me which is that agreement which fixed targets for greenhouse gas reductions, GHGs? The Kyoto Protocol, isn't it? That was the agreement which for the first time set definitive targets related to the reduction of greenhouse gases. What are greenhouse gases? What are these greenhouse gases? I'm sure you must be knowing. Methane, carbon dioxide. Why are they called greenhouse gases? They trap what? Heat. They trap the terrestrial radiation, isn't it? Sun నుంచి వచ్చే రేడియేషన్ని ఇన్కమింగ్ సోలార్ రేడియేషన్ అంటారు. కొంతసేపు ఎర్త్ వేడెక్కిన తర్వాత ఆ వేడిని వదిలేస్తుంది కదండి, స్పూన్ పెడితే వేడిని వదిలేస్తుంది కదా, అట్లాగే ఎర్త్ కూడా వేడంతా వదిలేస్తుంది కదా. దిస్ ఈస్ వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ as terrestrial radiation or outgoing terrestrial radiation, isn't it? This outgoing terrestrial radiation is trapped by some gases in the atmosphere and they are called as greenhouse gases, leading to what's called as greenhouse effect. Kada? Why do they trap these outgoing radiations? Why are they transparent to the incoming solar radiation? Wavelengths. Yeah, of course, right. Okay, so Kyoto Protocol of 1997 for the first time fixed monitorable targets for reduction of greenhouse gases. The hotter the body, the shorter is the wavelength. Yeah, please take down. The Kyoto Protocol of 1997, the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 was the first international treaty under UNFCCC that legally bound developed nations to reduce their greenhouse gases by an average of what percent? 5%, 5.2% actually. Okay, 5% to the 1990 levels. It provided for flexible mechanisms like emission trading, clean development mechanism. Joint implementation. Joint implementation, etc. Okay, now please remember that from here onwards, a principle of environmental protection called common but differentiated responsibilities, మీకు తెలుసు కదా, CBDR అని చెప్పి అంటారు. Have you heard about that? Common but differentiated responsibilities came to be accepted. It means that protection of environment is a common responsibility of all the nations, but the responsibility to clean environment from pollutants is differentiated. Okay, it means developed countries should assume a greater amount of responsibility compared to the underdeveloped countries. This is what's called as the principle of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR principle. India supports the CBDR principle. Okay, so this was how Kyoto Protocol had come out with all these mechanisms. Just get to know what this is. Carbon trading ante enti, or emission trading ante enti. Okay, clean development mechanism ante enti, joint implementation ante enti, what do they actually mean? Just get to know the gist of all these phrases. Anybody, what do you mean by clean development mechanism? ఎన్విరాన్మెంట్ అయిందా మీకు? అయిందా? ఓకే, క్లీన్ డెవలప్మెంట్ మెకానిజం అంటే ఏంటి? వాట్ డస్ ఇట్ మీన్? ఇట్ సింప్లీ మీన్స్ దట్ ఎమిషన్ ట్రేడింగ్ అంటే తెలుసు కదా, ఒక డెవలప్డ్ కంట్రీ ఇన్స్టెడ్ ఆఫ్ మీటింగ్ ఇట్స్ టార్గెట్స్, మీట్ కాలేకపోయింది అనుకోండి, 5% టు 1990 లెవెల్స్, వేరే వాళ్ళకంటే తక్కువ చేస్తున్నారు అనుకోండి, వాళ్ళ దగ్గర మిగిలిపోయింది అనుకోండి, వాళ్ళ దగ్గర నుంచి కార్బన్ క్రెడిట్స్ కొనుక్కోవచ్చు అనమాట. దిస్ ఈస్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ఎమిషన్ ట్రేడింగ్. ఓకే, సో ఐఎమ్ పొల్యూటింగ్, అదర్ కంట్రీ ఈజ్ వెల్ బిలో its target, I can buy that additional from that country. This is what's called as carbon trading. Got it? Clean development mechanism ante enti? A developed country which is beyond its emission levels can invest in developing countries clean energy mechanisms. Got it? So clean energy ki sambandhinచిన projects ni developing countries ki will invest chesi they can pollute a little more. 5% కంటే ఎక్కువ ఉందనుకోండి పొల్యూషన్, వీళ్ళు ఏం చేయొచ్చు అంటే అంత మేరకు, ఎంతైతే ఎక్కువ పొల్యూషన్ ఉందో అంత మేరకు ఇన్వెస్ట్మెంట్ దే కెన్ మేక్ ఇన్ డెవలపింగ్ కంట్రీస్ ఇన్ క్లీన్ ఎనర్జీ ప్రాజెక్ట్స్. దాన్ని క్లీన్ డెవలప్మెంట్ మెకానిజం అని చెప్పి అంటారు. ఓకే, అట్లాగే జాయింట్ ఇంప్లిమెంటేషన్ అట్లాగే ఉంది. జస్ట్ గో త్రూ వాట్ దే ఆర్. ఓకే, ఫ్రమ్ యువర్ preliminary point of view, what each of these mechanisms are. Okay, please take down from this time onwards. From this time onwards, a new principle called common but differentiated responsibility came to be accepted. Common but differentiated responsibility came to be accepted. Next, also there was another thing which is a part of the Earth Summit, which is a declaration on forest management. Raskondi, first is Agenda 21, second is CBD, third one is UNFCCC, the fourth one is Declaration on Forest Management. The Earth Summit also led to declaration on forest management, led to declaration on principles of forest management. Okay. Now, just please remember that ఈ CBDR ప్రిన్సిపల్ ఉంది కదా, కామన్ బట్ డిఫరెన్షియేటెడ్ రెస్పాన్సిబుల్ అండ్ ప్రిన్సిపల్ ఉంది కదా, దట్ ప్రిన్సిపల్ వాజ్ అప్గ్రేడెడ్ టు CBDR RC, respective capacity. We'll discuss this very soon. Can you tell me through which summit this was upgraded to CBDR RC? Any idea? రీసెంట్గా మనకి ప్యారిస్ క్లైమాటిక్ కాన్ఫరెన్స్ అయింది చూసారండి, అందులో CBDR was upgraded to CBDR RC. We'll come to that later. Okay, so this is about CBDR principle and all that. We'll come to that a little later. Now, apart from this, there are a series of several other conventions and agreements that have taken place. Just note a few which can sometimes be asked for your preliminary. Okay, Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol was for ozone depleting substances. Ozone depleting substances. Ozone depleting substances. This was in 1997 and 1987. Now please remember that this actually is an agreement that was made for phasing out substances which were ozone depleting, like you must have heard about them, chlorofluorocarbons and perfluorocarbons. They deplete ozone layer and all that, ozone hole adi undi ani cheppannaru. So what remember, the credit of Montreal Protocol was that it is considered to be the most successful environmental agreement that was ever made, because ఈ అగ్రిమెంట్ కింద అయినటువంటి ప్రోగ్రెస్ నన్ అదర్ అగ్రిమెంట్ కుడ్ ఎవర్ అచీవ్. దిస్ ఇస్ కన్సిడర్డ్ టు బి ద మోస్ట్ సక్సెస్ఫుల్ ఆఫ్ ఆల్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంటల్ కన్వెన్షన్స్ ఎంటర్డ్ ఇన్ టు బై నేషన్ స్టేట్స్. రాసుకోండి, మోంట్రియల్ ప్రోటోకాల్ is considered to be the most successful environmental convention in terms of its impact. Next, United Nations Convention to combat desertification. Nineteen ninety four. This convention targets desertification and land degradation. Next, Basel Convention, BASEL, Basel Convention. మీకు ఎగ్జామినేషన్లో కొన్నిసార్లు ఇవి 4 ఇచ్చి రిలేటెడ్ సబ్స్టెన్సెస్ ఇచ్చి అదే రిలేటెడ్ టార్గెట్స్ ఇచ్చి మ్యాచ్ చేయమని చెప్పొచ్చు అన్నమాట. బేసల్ కన్వెన్షన్ 1989 for the control of export of hazardous wastes and prevent their dumping in the developing countries. Okay, ప్రివెంట్ దేర్ డంపింగ్ ఇన్ ద డెవలపింగ్ కంట్రీస్. ఈ డెవలప్డ్ కంట్రీస్ ఏం చేస్తాయంటే కొంతమంది ఈ కరప్ట్ లీడర్స్ ఉంటారు కదా, వాళ్ళతో అగ్రిమెంట్స్ చేసేసుకుని వాళ్ళ హజార్డస్ వేస్ట్ అనేది ఈ కంట్రీస్లో వీళ్ళు డంప్ చేసేస్తుంటారు. ఇట్లాంటివి ప్రివెంట్ చేయడం కోసం చేసిన కన్వెన్షన్, బేసిల్ కన్వెన్షన్. నెక్స్ట్ వీ హ్యావ్ ద రోటర్డామ్ కన్వెన్షన్. ద రోటర్డామ్ కన్వెన్షన్ 1998. Rotterdam Convention 1998. This convention establishes rules for international trade of hazardous chemicals. For international trade of hazardous chemicals. Next, of course, one of the earliest is the Ramsar Convention 1971 on, what was this? Ramsar, R-A-M-S-A-R, Ramsar Convention. దేనికోసం అయింది ఇది? 1971 wetlands, రాసుకోండి, రామ్సర్ కన్వెన్షన్ 1971. This convention was for conservation and sustainable use of wetlands. Next, Convention on Transnational Trade in Endangered Species, CITES అంటారు కదా. Convention on International Trade. Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species 1973. Next, Stockholm Convention 2001 on persistent organic pollutants, POPs అంటారు చూసారా, persistent organic pollutants. Okay, now one of the fundamental difference between developed countries represented by US and of course developing countries represented by India and US, they both differ because India supports the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. The principle is supported by India because it upholds what is called as the historic application of environmental protection. It means all those countries which have historically been culprits in environmental protection, they are supposed to pay. This is what's called as the historical principle as well. Okay, so commonly every country has the responsibility of protecting the environment, but historically all those countries which have polluted more, they have a greater responsibility. This is CBDR. Okay, India supports this principle, while America supports the principle of what's called as the polluter pays. Today, whichever is the country which is the biggest polluter, it has to pay for environmental pollution. This is what's called as the principle of polluter pays. This is where India and US both differ from each other. Okay, రాసుకోండి, India supports India supports the historical principle which is upheld by common but differentiated responsibilities. The principle of CBDR, the principle of CBDR was first introduced through UNFCCC. It's a convention agreement kada, was introduced through UNFCCC of 1992. This principle evolved into CBDR hyphen respective capacities under the Paris Climatic Conference, under Paris Climate Agreement, under Paris Climate Agreement. And this principle has since remained as the key element related to environmental protections, environmental negotiations. Okay, now please remember CBDR అంటే ఏం లేదండి, చెప్పాను కదా మీకు, all the people have a common responsibility, but the differentiated actions should be done, because there are some countries which are more bigger polluters historically, while others have polluted less. Kabatti differentiated responsibility. Okay, that's what this principle is all about. Respective capacities means that this principle also takes into consideration the gaps between the developed countries and the developing countries in tackling environmental issues. Okay, so ఒకళ్ళ దగ్గర కెపాసిటీ లేదనుకోండి, you recognize the lesser capacity of that country in tackling environment. This is what's called as respective capacities. So ultimately CBDR-RC had given rise to three fundamental aspects. ఒకటి historical principle, rendu the principle that the countries differ in their capacities to tackle environmental issues. Okay, third, it is a common responsibility of the entire mankind. ఈ మూడు assumptions are out of this principle. Okay, మీకు ఎగ్జామినేషన్లో ప్రిలిమినరీలో పర్టికులర్లీ the principle of CBDR-RC stands for which among the following, or does not stand for which among the following అని చెప్పి A, B, C అట్లా ఇస్తాడు. ఓకే, and he'll give you 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only. ఈ మూడు గుర్తుపెట్టుకోండి, రైట్, రాసుకోండి. CBDR-RC represents three components. One, environment is a global common. Environment is a global common which requires collective effort or action. Two, CBDR recognizes historical differences between developed and developing countries. in creation of environmental problems. In creation of environmental problems. 3. The principle also recognizes the differences in economic and technical capabilities. Between developed and developing countries. In taking up steps for environmental protection. Okay, next last point, CBDR RC undi kada. It also provides for what is called as a loss, LOSS, loss. But కొన్ని countries ఉన్నాయి, for example, small countries like Fiji, Tonga, చిన్న countries కదా. These countries have not contributed anything to environmental degradation. పెద్ద డెవలప్మెంట్ ఏం లేదు, లో టెక్నాలజీ ఉంది, చిన్న కంట్రీస్. వాళ్ళు ఒకవేళ పొల్యూషన్ చేసినా కూడా ఇట్ డజంట్ ఎఫెక్ట్ ఎనీబడి. అట్లాంటి కంట్రీస్ అన్నమాట, ఈ స్మాల్ కంట్రీస్. బట్ దీస్ కంట్రీస్ ఆర్ ఎక్సెప్షనల్లీ మోర్ వల్నరబుల్ టు ఎన్విరాన్మెంటల్ degradation because they are island nations with huge coastal lines. So these countries which have not contributed anything to environmental degradation are disproportionately facing threat and loss because of environmental degradation. ఇట్లాంటి కంట్రీస్ నీడ్స్ని అడ్రస్ చేయడానికి ఒక ఫండ్ని ఇది ప్రపోజ్ చేస్తుంది, CBDR ప్రపోజెస్. ఓకే, ప్లీజ్ టేక్ డౌన్. CBDR RC proposes loss and damage fund for poor island or coastal nations which have made minimum or no contribution to climate change, but which have high risk and vulnerability for environmental degradation. These countries have a risk of $525 billion due to climate change. The Western countries, particularly US, particularly US, are against the loss and damage fund. Okay, just anything you know about Paris Climate Agreement? What was the purpose of the Paris Climate Agreement? అది క్యోటో ప్రోటోకాల్ ఏదో ఎండ్ అయిపోతుందంట కదా, ఇదన్నట్టు. కాబట్టి దాని ప్లేస్లో ఫర్ continuation we record another agreement, and therefore the Paris Climate Agreement was finalized. It also fixes up certain specific targets for reduction of greenhouse gases, isn't it? So that in the long run we only have such emissions which are not more than that can be absorbed by the flora, fauna and oceans and all that. Okay, so oka Paris Climate Agreement ni finalize cheyadam jarigindi annamata. Raskondi, Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Climate Agreement 195 countries have in 2015 entered into a historic agreement to deal with the issue of global warming. This agreement aims to keep the global rise of temperature to below 2 degrees, to below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. ఓకే, సో ప్రీ ఇండస్ట్రియల్ లెవెల్లో ఏదైతే టెంపరేచర్ ఉందో దానికంటే ఎక్కువ 2 డిగ్రీస్కి మించకుండా వీ షుడ్ బ్రింగ్ డౌన్ ద గ్లోబల్ టెంపరేచర్ రైజ్ అనేది టార్గెట్. ఓకే, ప్లీజ్ కంటిన్యూ రైటింగ్. This agreement further proposes to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase further to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Next, third, the agreement seeks to limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by human activities to those levels that trees, soil and oceans can absorb naturally. Okay, naturally by some point between 2050 to 2100, 2050 to 2100, 2050 to 2100 ఏమంటారు దాన్ని, సిఈ, కరెంట్ ఇరా. సో ఎనీవేర్ బిట్వీన్ 2050 to 2100, ఈ 50 years లోపల we should achieve such emission targets that all carbon emissions due to anthropogenic or human activities should be to that minimum level that can be absorbed efficiently by soil, oceans and trees. ఓకే, అంటే హ్యూమన్ యాక్షన్స్ వల్ల ఇంకేమీ ఎక్సెస్ ఎమిషన్స్ ఉండకూడదు అని చెప్పి ఆ టార్గెట్ రీచ్ అయిపోవాలి బిట్వీన్ 250 to 2100. దిస్ ఈజ్ అబౌట్ ప్యారిస్ క్లైమేట్ అగ్రిమెంట్ టార్గెట్స్. ఓకే, they can be given in preliminary, just keep them in mind. Okay, and apart from this they also propose several other aspects, right? Now what is the issue between India, and of course please also remember that the Paris climate agreement introduced CBDR RC principle. Raskondi, this agreement introduced CBDR RC. CBDR RC. This agreement, had it come into force? This agreement came into force in 2016 and రాసుకోండి ఎందుకని మంచిది. Paris climate agreement came into force in 2016. ఏమంటే వీళ్ళు this agreement provides that this agreement will come into force if at least 55 members of that agreement who contribute to 55% of global carbon emissions వీళ్ళు దీన్ని రాటిఫై చేశారనుకోండి, దట్ అగ్రిమెంట్ విల్ కమ్ ఇన్ టు ఫోర్స్. ఓకే, సో ఇట్లా రాటిఫికేషన్ అయిపోయింది కాబట్టి దిస్ అగ్రిమెంట్ హ్యాడ్ కమ్ ఇన్ టు ఫోర్స్ ఇన్ 2016. ఓకే, అర్థమైంది కదా మీకు. మొత్తం మెంబర్స్ ఎవరైతే సైన్ చేశారో అందులో 55, అట్లీస్ట్ 55 మెంబర్స్ who contribute to 55% of global carbon emissions వీళ్ళు ratify చేస్తే then the agreement will come into force. You know what is the meaning of ratification, right? After the delegates go to the conference and sign the agreement, then that agreement will be sent back to the country where the country's parliament will have to approve that agreement. That is called as ratification. And once the parliament ratifies the agreement, the instruments of ratification will be deposited with the secretariat of the agreement, and then it means the agreement will come into force as far as that country is concerned. ఇప్పుడు ఇండియా EU ట్రేడ్ డీల్ సైన్ చేసేసాయి కదా, అందరూ షేక్ హ్యాండ్లు ఇచ్చుకుని ఇట్లాగా హ్యాండ్స్ అందరూ జరిగింది. కానీ ఇప్పుడు ఏమవుతుంది అంటే దిస్ హ్యాస్ టు బి అప్రూవ్డ్ బై యూరోపియన్ యూనియన్ కౌన్సిల్ ఫస్ట్. ఆ తర్వాత ఎవ్రీ ఇండివిజువల్ యూరోపియన్ కంట్రీ 27 కంట్రీస్ కదా, all of them will have to individually ratify the treaty, and then the treaty will come into force for India and European Union. టైం పడుతుంది కదా, ఇంకో 6 months 8 months టైం పడుతుంది, ఏమో ఇంకా ఎక్కువ పట్టచ్చు, రైట్? బట్ యూ హ్యావ్ టు వెయిట్ ఫర్ దట్ టైమ్, బిఫోర్ యూ స్టార్ట్ హ్యావింగ్ యూరోపియన్ ప్రోడక్ట్స్ ఇన్ ఇండియన్ మార్కెట్స్. ఓకే, సో this is about the Paris climate agreement. Now what's the problem that India has with US, right? Please take down. India supports the CBDR, US supports the historic the principle of polluter pays. Raskondi, India supports the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, while US supports the principle of polluter pays. Polluter pays. Okay, now polluter pays. Now secondly, polluter pays. Whichever country is polluting more, it should pay more. For example, today China and India are the largest polluters, so they have to pay more. You know, Donald Trump only, he was the one who said, these people, they produce lot of children. These countries are full of population. They are high consumption societies. And these are the countries which are polluting the atmosphere. ఇంట్లాంటి పదాలు వాడితే తప్పు కదా. Okay, that's the kind of things which he uses. He was saying this to his NATO allies. You know what he said? The British, French and Portuguese soldiers never stood in the front lines of battle in Afghanistan. They always stood in the backward lines. And that's the reason why these countries did not have any casualties. Thousands of NATO members, soldiers have lost their lives. England nunchi, Denmark nunchi, many people have lost their lives. And this is what Donald Trump is saying to his NATO allies. మీరు మీ సోల్జర్స్ తీసుకెళ్ళి వెనకబెట్టారు, యుఎస్ సోల్జర్స్ ముందున్నారు, కాబట్టి మేము ప్రొటెక్ట్ చేసాము మిమ్మల్ని. ఓకే, నవ్ అపార్ట్ ఫ్రమ్ దిస్, the US and India also have differences with respect to other aspects. Raskondi, other aspects related to environment. Other aspects related to environment between India and US include the US pressure on India US pressure on India to scale down coal-based energy production. Coal-based energy production. Both the countries also differ from each other on the issue of carbon border taxes. Okay, have you heard about this? Carbon border taxes. These are taxes which are imposed on goods which have, which are produced through high carbon emissions. High carbon emissions so produce చేసే goods ఉంటాయి చూసారండి, అట్లాంటి గూడ్స్ మీద విధించే ట్యాక్స్ని కార్బన్ బార్డర్ ట్యాక్స్ అని చెప్పి అంటారు. ఆల్సో ఇంపార్టెంట్ ఫ్రమ్ ప్రిలిమినరీ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ, బికాస్ దిస్ ఈస్ వెరీ మచ్ ఇన్ న్యూస్ నౌ. 2026 European Union had imposed a mechanism to put in place a carbon border tax, which was a contentious issue in the India-EU trade deal. ఇప్పుడు ట్రేడ్ డీల్ అవుతుంది కదా, దాంట్లో ఇది ఒక కంటెన్షియస్ ఇష్యూ ఏంటంటే కార్బన్ బార్డర్ ట్యాక్సెస్. కాబట్టి యూ లెర్న్ మోర్ అబౌట్ దిస్ ట్యాక్సెస్ ఫర్ యువర్ ప్రిలిమినరీ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ. గూగులింగే కదా, యూ కెన్ వెరీ ఈజీలీ టుడే నాలెడ్జ్ ఈస్ జస్ట్ అట్ యువర్ ఫింగర్ టిప్స్. ఓకే, ఎనీథింగ్ విచ్ యూ డోంట్ నో, జస్ట్ గూగుల్ ఇట్ అండ్ జస్ట్ నో సమ్ బేసిక్స్ అబౌట్ దిస్. వాట్ ఆర్ దిస్ కార్బన్? కొన్ని గూడ్స్ ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేసేటప్పుడు హై కార్బన్ ఎమిషన్స్ అవుతున్నాయి, అట్లాంటి గూడ్స్ మీద విధించే ట్యాక్స్ని కార్బన్ బార్డర్ ట్యాక్స్ అంటారు. ఎందుకంటే ఇవే గూడ్స్ని డెవలప్డ్ కంట్రీస్లో కంపెనీస్ ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేస్తుంటే దే ఆర్ హ్యావింగ్ టు ఇన్కర్ కార్బన్ కాస్ట్స్. ఆర్ యు విత్ మీ? దీస్ కంపెనీస్ విచ్ ఆర్ ప్రొడ్యూసింగ్ ద సేమ్ గూడ్స్ ఇన్ డెవలప్డ్ కంట్రీస్ దే ఆర్ హ్యావింగ్ టు ఇన్కర్ కార్బన్ కాస్ట్స్. అదే డెవలపింగ్ కంట్రీస్లో ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ ఉన్నాయి కదా, కాబట్టి ఇక్కడ though there is high carbon emission, the goods are not costing to that extent. కాబట్టి they are made available at lower costs in the developed countries. దాన్ని ఆఫ్సెట్ చేయడం కోసం విధించే ట్యాక్స్ని కార్బన్ బార్డర్ ట్యాక్స్ అని చెప్పి అంటారు. ఓకే, అమెరికా సపోర్ట్స్ కార్బన్ బార్డర్ ట్యాక్స్, ఇండియా అపోజెస్ ఇట్. ఇట్ హస్ బీన్ ఎ మేజర్ కంటెన్షన్ బిట్వీన్ ఇండియా అండ్ యుఎస్ as far as trade front is concerned. Okay, right, this is about the environmental issues between India and US. There is also issue about intellectual property rights between both these countries. Raskondi, the issue of intellectual property rights between India and US. Intellectual property rights remain a contentious issue. Intellectual property rights remain a contentious issue between India and US. Particularly is the dispute related to frequent bans imposed by US on generic drugs which are imported from India. Okay. Now there is a report submitted annually in US called the Trade Representative Special Report 301, in which, you know, the intellectual property rights regimes in various trading partners of US are studied and they are placed in some specific lists. Okay, now ఈ రిపోర్ట్లో ఇండియా ఈజ్ ప్లేస్డ్ ఇన్ వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ as the priority watch list. ఎందుకంటే ఇండియాలో ఇంటలెక్చువల్ ప్రాపర్టీ రైట్స్ రెజిమ్ ఈజ్ వెరీ వీక్. కాబట్టి అమెరికన్ ఇంపోర్ట్స్ ఏమన్నా మనం తెచ్చుకున్నట్లయితే మనం వాటిని నకలు చేసి డూప్లికేట్ చేసి మార్కెట్స్లో వదిలేస్తామని చెప్పి వాళ్ళు అంటున్నారు. ఓకే, సో దిస్ ఈజ్ వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ద ట్రేడ్ రిప్రజెంటేటివ్ స్పెషల్ 301 రిపోర్ట్. దానిలో దే ఆర్ మెన్షనింగ్ ఇండియా యాజ్ ఏ ప్రయారిటీ వాచ్ స్టేట్. రాసుకోండి. The US Trade Representative Special 301 Trade Representative Special 301 report. ఓకే, దీన్నే యుఎస్టిఆర్ స్పెషల్ స్పెషల్ 301 రిపోర్ట్ అంటారండి. యుఎస్టిఆర్ స్పెషల్ 301 రిపోర్ట్. ఓకే, మెన్షన్స్ ఇండియా యాజ్ ఏ ప్రయారిటీ వాచ్ లిస్ట్ కంట్రీ. expressing concerns over the patent laws in India. In 2024 and 25, USA had criticized India's patent regime. Criticized patent regime as well as India's resort to compulsory licensing for pharmaceuticals. Compulsory licensing of pharmaceuticals. Okay. Next, India also, you know what is compulsory licensing? Compulsory licensing. Have you heard about that? ఇప్పుడు నార్మల్గా ఏంటంటే మనము ఏదైనా ఒక పేటెంటెడ్ డ్రగ్ ఉందనుకోండి. ఓకే, వాట్ యూ మీన్ బై పేటెంట్? దట్ స్పెసిఫిక్ కంపెనీ హ్యాస్ ఎ పేటెంట్ ఫర్ ఎ డ్రగ్. ఎందుకంటే అమెరికన్స్ స్పెండ్ బిలియన్స్ అండ్ బిలియన్స్ ఆఫ్ డాలర్స్ ఆన్ డ్రగ్ రీసెర్చ్. ఓకే, బిలియన్స్ ఆఫ్ డాలర్స్. దే హ్యావ్ 8 stages బిఫోర్ ద అమెరికన్ అదేదో ఒకటి ఏదో ఉందండి, డ్రగ్స్ అప్రూవ్ చేసే ఒక బాడీ ఉందన్నమాట. ఓకే, వాళ్ళు ఆ డ్రగ్ని అప్రూవ్ చేసే ముందు 8 stages ఉంటాయంట. 8 stages అండ్ బిలియన్స్ ఆఫ్ డాలర్స్ గోస్ ఇన్ టు దిస్ డ్రగ్ రీసెర్చ్, డెవలప్మెంట్, టెస్టింగ్, క్లినికల్ ట్రయల్స్ బిఫోర్ ఇట్ ఈస్ రిలీజ్డ్ ఇన్ టు మార్కెట్. ఓకే, మనలో ఏం చేస్తారు, సింపుల్గా ఆ డ్రగ్ని తెచ్చేసుకుని దాని కెమికల్ కాంపోజిషన్, ఫార్ములేషన్ మొత్తం అంతా తెలిసేసుకుని బల్క్ లెవెల్లో ఆ డ్రగ్ని ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేసేస్తూ ఉంటారు. మన రెడ్డి ల్యాబ్స్ అవన్నీ ఉన్నాయి చూసారు, రైట్? ఇలాంటివన్నీ చేస్తారన్నమాట. సో నార్మల్గా దిస్ ఇస్ నాట్ అలౌడ్. ఓకే, విచ్ ఎవర్ కంపెనీ హోల్డ్స్ ఎ పేటెంట్ ఎంజాయ్స్ ఎక్స్క్లూసివ్ మార్కెటింగ్ రైట్స్ ఫర్ ఎ స్పెసిఫిక్ పీరియడ్. ఆ తర్వాత ఆ పీరియడ్ అయిపోయిన తర్వాత ఇట్ బికమ్స్ ఎ జెనరిక్ డ్రగ్. అదర్ కంపెనీస్ ఆల్సో కెన్ ప్రొడ్యూస్ ఇట్. యూ మస్ట్ బి సీయింగ్ దిస్ జెనరిక్ డ్రగ్ మార్క్స్ చూస్తున్నారు కదా ఇప్పుడు. ఇండియా ఈజ్ జెనరిక్ డ్రగ్ హెడ్ క్వార్టర్స్ ఆఫ్ ద వరల్డ్స్ లార్జెస్ట్ బల్క్ డ్రగ్స్ ఆర్ బీయింగ్ ప్రొడ్యూస్డ్ బై ఇండియా. ఓకే, జెనరిక్ డ్రగ్స్ అంటే డ్రగ్స్ విచ్ ఆర్ అవుట్ సైడ్ ద పేటెంట్ రెజీమ్. ఓకే, నా అనుకుంటా ఎకానమీ సార్ కెన్ టెల్ యూ బెటర్. ఓకే, నాకు కొన్నిసార్లు ఏమవుతుందంటే దిర్ ఇస్ ఎ పేటెంటెడ్ డ్రగ్, ఓకే, ఫర్ విచ్ వీ హ్యావ్ టు పే మోర్ మనీ, రైట్? బికాస్ ఇట్స్ నాట్ నార్మల్గా జింకోవిట్ ఉందనుకోండి, మనకి మెడికల్ షాప్కి వెళ్ళి కొనుక్కుంటే ఏదో ఒక ప్రైస్ వస్తుంది. అదే బల్క్ డ్రగ్ స్టోర్స్కి వెళ్ళామనుకోండి చీప్లో వచ్చేస్తుంది, ఏదో వేరే పేరు ఉంటుంది దానికి, చీప్లో వచ్చేస్తుంది మనకి కదా. సేమ్ కాంపోజిషను, సేమ్ కెమికల్స్ అన్నీ సేమ్ ఉంటాయి. ఒక 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 డ్రగ్ ఉంది విచ్ ఇస్ పేటెంటెడ్, వీ హ్యావ్ టు పే మోర్ మనీ ఫర్ దాట్, బట్ ద డ్రగ్ ఈజ్ రిక్వైర్డ్ ఇన్ దిస్ కంట్రీ యాజ్ ఏ మెడికల్ ఎమర్జెన్సీ. ఒక మెడికల్ ఎమర్జెన్సీగా ఆ డ్రగ్ మనకి కావాలి. అప్పుడు ఏం చేయొచ్చు అంటే గవర్నమెంట్ దే కెన్ రిసార్ట్ టు వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ అస్ కంపల్సరీ లైసెన్సింగ్. ద గవర్నమెంట్ కెన్ అప్రూవ్ ద డ్రగ్ మ్యానుఫ్యాక్చర్ దో ఇట్ ఈస్ పేటెంటెడ్ టు మీట్ ఎ మెడికల్ ఎమర్జెన్సీ. దిస్ ఈస్ వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ అస్ కంపల్సరీ లైసెన్సింగ్. అమెరికా సేస్ there should not be this process of compulsory licensing. Okay, అమెరికా అబ్జెక్ట్స్ టు ఇండియాస్ రిసార్ట్ టు కంపల్సరీ. మన దగ్గర అన్ని రకాల జబ్బులు ఉంటాయి కదా, కాబట్టి మనకి కొన్నిసార్లు కొన్ని డ్రగ్స్ విచ్ ఆర్ పేటెంటెడ్, విచ్ ఆర్ we may require as a part of medical emergency. Then the government of India can approve the manufacture of the drug though it is patented, giving the authority for drug companies to manufacture it. Dinne compulsory licensing antaru. Okay, study about this more. And India on the other hand objects to the practice of evergreening by American drug industries. Evergreening, have you heard about that? Okay, please take down. India on the other hand differs with America on the issue of evergreening of a patent. Evergreening of a patent. ఓకే, evergreening అంటే ఏంటి? ఎనీబడి? మళ్ళీ ఒక పేటెంట్ ఉందండి, డ్రగ్ మీద ఒక పేటెంట్ ఉంది ఒక కంపెనీకి. వాడు ఏం చేస్తారంటే ఆ ఫార్ములేషన్లో చిన్న చేంజ్ తీసుకొచ్చేసి మళ్ళీ కొత్త పేటెంట్ కోసం అప్లై చేసి మళ్ళీ ఫ్రెష్ పేటెంట్ తోటి వాళ్ళు మళ్ళీ ఆ డ్రగ్ని మార్కెట్కి తెస్తారు. దీన్ని ఎవర్ గ్రీనింగ్ అని చెప్పి అంటారు. ఓకే, సో చిన్న చిన్న మార్పులతోటి మళ్ళీ అదే డ్రగ్ మీద వాళ్ళు పేటెంట్ రైట్స్ని పొందడాన్ని ఎవర్ గ్రీనింగ్. దట్స్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ఎవర్ గ్రీనింగ్. రీసెంట్గా వీ హ్యాడ్ దిస్ ఇష్యూ ఆఫ్ ఎ టీబీ డ్రగ్, బెడాక్విలిన్ ఏదో ఉంది, వెరీ గుడ్. జాన్సన్ అండ్ జాన్సన్ వ్యతిరేకంగా వెన్ దట్ కంపెనీ వాస్ ట్రైంగ్ టు ఎవర్ గ్రీన్ ఏ పేటెంట్ రిలేటెడ్ టు ఏ టీబీ డ్రగ్, ఇండియా objected to that. Okay, and this is the differences that we have as far as intellectual property rights are concerned. Okay, now please remember that under the World Trade Organization we had an agreement called TRIPS. Have you heard that? Trade related intellectual property rights, which requires that every member of WTO should put in place a very strong intellectual property rights regime, so that the innovations and ingenuity of the creators of products, their intellectual property should be protected kada dani kosam, right? So this is where India and US again have certain problems. In recent times, of course, we had the problem of tariffs which are being imposed on India, particularly after Donald Trump had come into power. Okay, now Donald Trump calls this as reciprocatory tariffs, actually. On which date he inaugurated tariffs, the regime of tariffs? April 2nd, isn't it? April 1st cheyalsindi, All Fools Day, isn't it? April 2nd chesadu, and he called that as the National Liberation Day of America. I think he thinks himself as Abraham Lincoln or somebody like that. Who was this? Who said that? Who was the person who equated Donald Trump with Abraham Lincoln, sir, recently? I think, I hope, and I think it is Pakistani, some Pakistani, I think. Somebody equated Donald Trump with Abraham Lincoln kada recently. దేనికోసమో చేశాడు, I don't know. Okay, now the problem of tariffs, raskondi, the issue of tariffs in Indo-US relations. Yesterday you wrote about the issue of visas, right? The visa issues, you've written them. Recently Donald Trump had increased the visas to $1 lakh, isn't it? You wrote that kada yesterday. Okay, రాయలేదా? ఓకే, వీసా ఇష్యూస్లో ఏంటి అంటే wrote that. Okay, generalized system of preferences, we discussed that yesterday. Generalized system of preferences allows the richer countries to provide lower tariffs to imports from developing countries. Recently Donald Trump had removed India from the list of GSP countries. Remember, it is European Union which gives maximum concessions to India under the GSP scheme. Okay, next is US, but Donald Trump removed India from the list of GSP countries. Okay, next now tariffs, right? Now you know that tariffs are in the form of duties imposed on imports. Raskondi, tariffs are described as duties imposed on imports. America has the largest trade deficit in the world. Largest trade deficit in the world. Which is estimated to be approximately $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion. American trade deficit continued to be more than $1 trillion for the last 4 years. American government declared its tariff policies with two purposes. One, to address the trade imbalance ఓకే, ఎందుకంటే ఎప్పుడైతే టారిఫ్స్ విధిస్తారో ఇంపోర్ట్స్ మీద, ద డొమెస్టిక్ కంపెనీస్ విల్ బి డిస్కరేజ్డ్ ఫ్రమ్ ఇంపోర్టింగ్ గూడ్స్ బికాస్ దే ఆర్ నాట్ గోయింగ్ టు కాస్ట్ మోర్, అండ్ ద ఇంపోర్టెడ్ గూడ్స్ కాంపిటేటివ్నెస్ ఇన్ ద మార్కెట్ ఆల్సో విల్ ఫాల్. దేర్ఫోర్ ద ఇంపోర్టర్స్ విల్ బి డిస్కరేజ్డ్. ఓకే, ఇప్పుడు ఇండియా నుంచి సబ్బులు ఇంపోర్ట్ చేసుకుంటారనుకోండి, అక్కడ ఇండియన్ సోప్స్కి బాగా డిమాండ్ ఉందనుకోండి, ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ టారిఫ్స్ విధించారనుకోండి, ఇండియన్ సోప్స్ ఆర్ గోయింగ్ టు కాస్ట్ మోర్. Therefore, the importer will not import these soaps for marketing them in US. So this is how the Indian goods will lose their competitive edge in the American markets. That's the first impact of tariffs, isn't it? Okay. And secondly, according to the US government, the tariffs are being imposed. What's the second purpose? Why are these tariffs being imposed by US? First is, as I told you, to address the trade imbalance. How? By discouraging imports. The imported goods will cost more in the American markets, kabatti imports will become less. A trade imbalance edaithe undo, that will be addressed. Okati. Second reason as to why tariffs are imposed, India మీద కాదండి, నార్మల్గా అందరి మీద, for enhancing domestic industrialization. Please take down. Secondly, tariffs are imposed to enhance domestic manufacturing sector. Okay, how is this going to be, how are these tariffs going to improve domestic manufacturing sector? Because imports will become costly, therefore companies will want to produce locally. Atla domestic manufacturing sector kuda perige avakasam untundi. Two reasons cited by the American government for imposition of tariffs. And Donald Trump initiated this tariff policy on April 2nd, 2025. Yeah, I told you, right? The year switch has still not registered. 2025, April 2nd, the tariff policy was introduced by Donald Trump. Now, the Trump administration calls these tariffs as reciprocal tariffs. Raskondi, the American government described the tariffs as reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs are reciprocal tariffs are taxes imposed on goods from those countries which impose higher tariffs on US exports. On US exports. You remember his statement, if you are going to tax us, we are going to tax you. Ante, reciprocal tariffs. So, this is how he described his reciprocal tariffs. And he said, okay, with these tariffs, we are going to create millions of new jobs in America because the domestic manufacturing sector will get a boost. So, new employment opportunities will be produced. The trade imbalance and the deficit can be addressed. And we are also required to punish those countries which are imposing high tariffs on us and cheating us and skimming off all the revenues from us. He almost described those countries imposing high tariffs as thieves. You know, Donald Trump, they are cheating us. It is a fraud that is being committed on American people for years together. A lot of money we are giving away. Friends, those people who call themselves our friends are imposing 100% tariffs on American goods. He was citing European Union. Okay, he was citing India, right? India is a very good friend of America, but India is a tariff king, is a tariff abuser. There are some goods on which India imposes 200% tariffs. There are some goods on which India actually imposes 200% tariffs. 150% tariff is imposed by India on American bourbon, అంటే whiskies. Okay. మనకి ఏం కావాలో మనం చూసుకోవాలి కదా. సో అమెరికన్ విస్కీస్ మీద 150% టారిఫ్ ఇంపోజ్ చేస్తుంది ఇండియా. ఓకే, సో వాట్ ఎవర్. సో దెర్ ఆర్ సమ్ గూడ్స్ ఆన్ విచ్ ఇండియా ఇస్ ఇంపోజింగ్ వెరీ హై టారిఫ్స్ ఆల్సో. ఓకే, బట్ దెర్ ఆర్ ఆల్సో సమ్ గూడ్స్ ఆన్ విచ్ అమెరికా ఆల్సో ఇంపోజెస్ వెరీ హై టారిఫ్స్ ఆన్ ఇండియన్ గూడ్స్. దెర్ ఆర్ సమ్ గూడ్స్ విచ్ ఆర్ సెన్సిటివ్ ఫర్ అమెరికా ఆల్సో. అవి ఏం చెప్పరండి, ఈ మాత్రమే చెప్తారు. ఓకే, చెప్పి హీ అక్యూజెస్ ఇండియా ఆఫ్ imposing very high tariffs, and this is now in 2025 itself, first America imposed 25% tariffs on India. Overall 25% tariffs on Indian imports to America. Raskondi, in 2025 India was subjected to 25% tariffs, specifically targeting textiles, pharmaceuticals, and IT hardware. Okay, now on China initially he imposed 36% tariff. Kani China immediately it stopped export of critical minerals to America. Ventane U-turn తీసుకున్నాడు అన్నమాట. ఓకే, చైనా మీద he reduced the tariffs on China. ఓకే, అట్లా అంటే లీవరేజ్ మనకి లేదు. India does not have such kind of a leverage. And as I told you, an additional 25% tariff was imposed on India because of India's oil purchase from Russia. Raskondi, an additional 25% tariff was imposed on India owing to due to India's oil trade with Russia. ఓకే, ఫస్ట్ టైం 25% టారిఫ్స్ని ఇండియా మీద విధించినప్పుడు ఇండియా వాజ్ ట్రయింగ్ టు ఎంగేజ్ ఇన్ నెగోసియేషన్స్ విత్ యుఎస్ ఫర్ ఎ ట్రేడ్ డీల్. ఇండియా హ్యాడ్ సెంట్ delegations to US for negotiations, and negotiations between India and US started for a trade deal. సరే, 25% మీరు ఇంపోజ్ చేశారు, లెట్స్ సిట్ అండ్ టాక్, let us finalize a trade deal which is acceptable to both you and us. Okay, now that was when 25% initial tariff was imposed on Indian goods. ఎప్పుడైతే ఇంకొక అడిషనల్ 25% ఇంపోజ్ చేశాడో, దెన్ ఇండియా సెడ్ ఫైన్, దిస్ ఇస్ టైమ్ ఫర్ ఇండియా టు లుక్ ఫర్ ఆల్టర్నేటివ్స్. అప్పటి నుంచి నరేంద్ర మోడీ స్టాప్డ్ అటెండింగ్ డొనాల్డ్ ట్రంప్స్ ఫోన్ కాల్స్ అన్నమాట. ఓకే, ఇంక వీటితో మాట్లాడడానికి ఏం లేదని చెప్పి డిసైడ్ అయ్యాను మనం. ఓకే, ఇనీషియల్గా అయితే వీఆర్ రెడీ ఫర్ ఏ డీల్. ఇప్పుడు కూడా నెగోసియేషన్స్ ఆర్ గోయింగ్ ఆన్, బట్ నెగోసియేషన్స్ ఆర్ నాట్ మేకింగ్ ఎనీ హెడ్వే యాజ్ ఆఫ్ నౌ. ఇట్స్ ఓన్లీ డొనాల్డ్ ట్రంప్ హూ ఇస్ సేయింగ్ వీఆర్ ఆన్ ద బ్రింక్ ఆఫ్ రీచింగ్ ఏ ఫైనల్ అగ్రిమెంట్ అని చెప్పి అంటున్నాడు, కానీ ఇట్స్ నాట్ మేకింగ్ ఎనీ. నెక్స్ట్, టారిఫ్స్. ప్లీజ్ టేక్ డౌన్ టారిఫ్స్. Tariffs. It is estimated to have costed around $6 billion. To have costed around $6 billion as additional cost for the Indian exporters. It had created stock market uncertainty, it led to rise in consumer prices. It led to rise in consumer prices, retaliatory tariffs by countries like China. It has affected critical export-based sectors in India. Critical export-based sectors in India. And India critical export-based sectors and India criticized US of weaponizing trade. Okay, so this is the impact of the imposition of tariffs on India, right? This has been another serious issue that is there in recent times. The last month or so, it is reported that US is beginning to make advancements for building close rapport with Jamaat-e-Islami of Bangladesh. You know that elections are scheduled in next month in Bangladesh, February 12th, I think, elections, 12th, 11th. Okay, so Bangladesh elections are scheduled for February 12th, and you know that India's very friendly party, Awami League, is nowhere to be seen in Bangladesh now, right? There are two principal political parties in Bangladesh. One is BNP, Bangladesh National Party, and second one is Jamaat-e-Islami. This is actually a communal outfit which has a very, very bad history. In 1971, Jamaat-e-Islami had actually organized what were called as death squads to kill and murder all those people who were supporting the national liberation of Bangladesh. It was against Bangladesh's independence and liberation from Pakistan. It supported integration of Bangladesh with Pakistan. There is every likelihood that tomorrow, after the elections, Jamaat-e-Islami might come to power. Because today it is being said that America is building a close relationship with the leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami. Okay, Monnatidaka, the problem for India was BNP, Bangladesh National Party. There were these two principal parties in Bangladesh, Awami League, which was pro-India, and Bangladesh National Party, which was slightly radical and Islamist. Okay, Awami League was a stable political party, and it was in power for the last 1.5 decades in Bangladesh. Okay, ఇప్పుడు లేదు కదా. There is a vacuum in Bangladesh because the leader of BNP, her name is Khalida Zia. She died, and her son, he was away from Bangladesh for last 1 decade. Okay, he was in Western countries. Recently, he came back to Bangladesh. Okay, right. This party also is very weak. America is supporting Jamaat-e-Islami, which is supposed to have very, very close links with Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI. Okay, so it is now almost established that USA is collaborating with Jamaat-e-Islami, which is against India's strategic interests. Okay, India ఏమో ఓ పక్కన యూరోపియన్ యూనియన్ తోటి, కెనడా తోటి, ఆస్ట్రేలియా తోటి ట్రేడ్ డీల్స్ చేసుకుని మన పొజిషన్ని సెక్యూర్ చేసుకునే ప్రయత్నం చేస్తున్నాం. అమెరికా ఏమో పాకిస్తాన్ తోటి, బంగ్లాదేశ్ తోటి ఫ్రెండ్షిప్. దిస్ ఈజ్ వాట్స్ హ్యాపెనింగ్, యునో. A superpower gone crazy, US, right? This is the another problem which we might witness in the coming years. Raskondi, in recent times, it is observed that America is engaging with Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh. Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh. Which could have strategic concerns for India. As Jamaat-e-Islami has close links with the Inter-Services Intelligence of Pakistan. The US outreach, the US outreach and efforts to establish ties with Jamaat-e Islami is a security concern for India. Is a security concern for India because of its links with Pakistan. Concerns related to Chabahar Port because of US actions in Middle East, unpredictability of US in its immigration policy, or other recent irritants which are affecting Indo-US relations. India and US, which could have been natural allies, became estranged democracies. Both these countries, which could be natural allies. America, the modern world's oldest democracy. India, the modern world's largest democracy. America, which is a multicultural society. India, a melting pot of diverse cultures. America, which is wedded to liberal international economic order and which created the Bretton Woods systems, including World Bank, IMF, and an agreement called GATT. India initially also joined all these organizations as a founding member. India also supported the liberal international economic order. Both these countries are secular. Both these countries have a common history of having suffered colonization. Both these countries could be natural allies. But unfortunately, both these countries became estranged democracies. Though the relationship had started a little warmly, with America extending food aid to India under, what is that? PL 480. India realized that America was weaponizing these and also this. The food aid is being used by America to influence policies of other countries. America was using these organizations to extend loans and facilities to its allies. Therefore, India reduced its interaction with this and discontinued with this. The problem with India and US lies in the fact that America always believed in the mechanism of strategic alliances. India believed in strategic autonomy. America made Pakistan a very important ally. Enduku? Because of the compulsions of Cold War. Why? Because Pakistan has Iran as one of its neighbor, which is an ally of Soviet Union. Pakistan has Afghanistan as another neighbor, which is a sphere of influence of Soviet Union. Pakistan has India, which is a friend to Soviet Union. Pakistan has Central Asian republics at another end, which are a part of former Soviet Union. ఎంత ఇంపార్టెంట్ చూసారా పాకిస్తాన్ అమెరికాకి. అండ్ దట్స్ వై Pakistan and America entered into a military alliance, while India adopted non-alignment. Indian foreign policy was criticized. Okay, India entered into Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation with Soviet Union in 1971 in the course of Bangladesh Liberation War. India conducted the peaceful nuclear experiment in 1974, which infuriated US. Why? Because India, according to US, violated the norms of nuclear non-proliferation. Okay? Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan in 1979 and India did not respond. So throughout the period of Cold War, India and US continued to remain as estranged democracies. Cold War came to an end. Okay? 1991. Slowly, from estranged democracies, we became engaged democracies. Engagement అయ్యిందండి, పెళ్లి కాల. Both the countries became engaged democracies. Pakistan lost its importance. Cold War లేదు, సోవియట్ యూనియన్ కమ్యూనిస్ట్ థ్రెట్ లేదు, కాబట్టి పాకిస్తాన్ అనవసరం. పాకిస్తాన్ ఈజ్ ఎ ల్యాండ్ ఆఫ్ బూట్లిక్కర్స్ కదా. సో అమెరికా డిడ్ నాట్ వాంట్ పాకిస్తాన్ ఎనీమోర్. ఓకే, సో Pakistan losing its strategic importance, India liberalizing its economy, India appeared very attractive to America. Attractive ante not otherwise, investment destination, trade opportunities. India is a very, very big market that could be leveraged. Okay, Kentucky fried chickens, Domino's, ivanni raavochu kada, McDonald's, all of them can come to India, isn't it? So India was a very large market. It was lucrative. It was an attractive trade and investment destination. Pakistan was losing its importance. Slowly, India and US started to come together. However, again there was a problem in the middle of 1990s, because India was feeling a security threat in its immediate vicinity. China and Pakistan became very close. ఎప్పుడైతే అమెరికా పాకిస్తాన్ని నెగ్లెక్ట్ చేసిందో, అమెరికా చైనా దగ్గర చేరిపోయింది అనమాట. అంతే కదా, పాకిస్తాన్ కాసేపు వాళ్ళు కాసేపు వీళ్ళు. హూ ఈజ్ పాకిస్తాన్స్ గుడ్ ఫ్రెండ్? ఈజ్ ఇట్ చైనా ఆర్ అమెరికా? చైనా ఆర్ అమెరికా? అప్పుడు ఎవడు డబ్బులు ఇస్తే వాడే వాళ్ళకి ఫ్రెండ్, అంతే. నేను అప్పుడప్పుడు అమెరికా, అప్పుడప్పుడు చైనా, అంతేనండి. ట్రూ, ఐఎమ్ నాట్ లయింగ్, ఇట్స్ ట్రూ. Look at Pakistan's history, it's like this, it's replete with examples like this. Okay, so America neglected Pakistan, so Pakistan went into arms of China briefly. Okay, now while India was slowly engaging with US, from estranged democracies, both these countries became engaged democracies. Okay, however, as I told you, as Pakistan-China nexus was becoming very strong and China was assuming aggressive postures to India, and India did not have Soviet Union to depend. India required to, conduct its nuclear tests. 1998. Malli India ki America ki chedindi. 1998. Okay. However, immediately, within 24 hours, Pakistan conducts nuclear tests. One, the world suddenly was jolted to the reality of South Asia. Whatever the concerns that India was expressing were genuine concerns, కదా మనకి, అన్ఫౌండెడ్ ఫియర్స్ కాదు కదా. పక్కలో బల్లంలాగా ఉంది పాకిస్తాన్, ఎప్పుడు ఏం చేస్తుందో తెలియదు. వాట్ ఎవర్ ద కన్సర్న్స్ దట్ ఇండియా హ్యాస్ దే వేర్ జెన్యున్ కన్సర్న్స్. ఓకే, 1999, the Kargil War. Pakistan's misadventure supported by China. China-Pakistan nexus came to be clearly established in the 1999 Kargil War. Ventane 2000, the American president begins his visit to India. After 3 decades, an American president visits India. Evaraina? Bill Clinton. He even came to Hyderabad. He even gave a speech here. Okay? Now, we were a generation, Memo, which saw a closed, backward-looking economy in 1980s and 1990s. We saw the Indian economy opening to the world in 1990s. We saw our friends and colleagues with dollar dreams crossing the Atlantic Ocean and going to America. We used to receive phone calls from them. Okay? We saw the societies changing in early 2000 when Indian markets began to be flooded with foreign goods, foreign banks coming to our doorsteps. Today, we are seeing change so fast, right? You'll also see, after 10, 12 years, you'll also see, apatla atlundedi, ippudu itla undi, But you know what? Remember, friends, some people are very aware to the changes that take place around them. For some people, changes just whiz by, even without them noticing it. It is up to you whether to be a part and to experience the change or just allow the change to go past. Be open. Keep your eyes open. Watch the world. That's the way you should prepare for civil services. Edo pustakaalu kadandi. World, that's the best experience you can have. Engaged democracy. 2000, Bill Clinton comes to India. 2002, next steps to strategic partnership. 2002, America to relationship start chesina kuda, we did not let go our strategic autonomy. We continue to maintain autonomy of our decisions. When America said, be with us in our war on terror, India said no. When America said, assist us militarily in our invasion against Iraq and Saddam Hussein, India said no. Kani, from 2006 to 2009, matram America em chepte chesam. Enduku? Because we wanted the civilian nuclear deal. Once the deal was signed in 2010, India opposes imposition of sanctions on Iran. No, we are not going to oppose. We are not going to support sanctions on Iran. Appadaka support chesamandi. Okay? A deal signed in ventane, India declared that it is not going to support sanctions on Iran. 2016, India resumes oil trade with Iran. Okay? Defying US. 2020, India continues oil trade with Russia, defying US. In spite of all those agreements and defense cooperation, India continued to maintain its strategic autonomy. But still, the engagement was intact. We continued to be engaged with US. We were taking the relationship to the next level when Donald Trump appears on the scene. Okay? And today, India and US are almost on the brink of divorce, I think, And India is looking for new engagements with European Union, with other countries. Right? This is the story of Indo-US relationship. Any doubts? I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, excuse me. I'll be seeing you on Saturday. You have some other classes, it seems. Okay? So I'll see you when I see you again. Thank you, sir.